Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for grabbing your coffee. So for those of you who didn't hear the introduction in the main room, sorry, I'm Anthony, and I work for an organization called the Democratic Society. We work on participation in government, that's what we do. So this is obviously a very interesting session for me to be in. I'm really looking forward to hearing our three fantastic speakers. But before I introduce the speakers, I did want to just say a few words about the topic of the session. So one of the things that I think it's very easy to do when you're thinking about participation, when you're thinking about citizenship, power and governance, is to get into really sort of big philosophical thoughts about, the future of the world and everything's about everything and, in a way, isn't democracy really about the rule of all and all of those sorts of interesting conversations. And they're really interesting conversations, which is why I enjoy having them so much. But that's not what we're here to do today. What we're here to do today is to think about some of the practical things that need to be done, some of the practical innovations that can be done by UNDP working with others to bring about a more open, more participative, more better governance system for the world. Now it's a huge question, but it shouldn't be a question that dazzles us. It shouldn't be one that frightens us by its scale. Because actually, most of the things that go on in government are about human relations and the human scale and about individuals and about people. So I want to try and set down some of the directions that I see we are going in and some of the things that I think we can use to frame the discussion. Because for me it feels like we've had a conversation about methods for a very long time. We've talked about digital tools, we've talked about participation, about participatory budgeting, we've talked about all sorts of ways in which people can be involved in democratic decision making. But a lot of the time those conversations have been about methods and processes as one-off things, as experiments, as places where things are happening. Now I heard in the main room that there was a desire for people to be connected with innovators and with innovation. And I think that's really important. But I don't think you should let go of the fact that the relationships that you have in the places where you work are in some ways just as important as those good ideas and those innovations. Because as someone who maybe calls themselves an innovator sometimes, I know that none of the ideas that we have and none of the ideas that we help implement are possible without long-term relationships. And that for me is the first big line of inquiry I would encourage you to think about. How do we go from things that are project innovations into system innovations? How do we go from things that are small scale, one-off, start and finish, into things that make a difference over the long term, where conversations take place over the long term and where we're building governance and governance change into governing systems? And the second thing flowing from that I'd want you to think about is the ways in which governments and government cultures can change in order to allow that to happen. Because we can produce fantastic innovation. We do produce fantastic innovation. But there's no point to it if what happens is it runs for a little while and then government loses interest, or the civil society people can't be brought on board because they don't see any impact to it. And we see this all the time. If there's one reason, the most common reason I would say that our projects don't work where they don't work is just a sort of slow release of energy, like a balloon slowly leaking the air out of it. It isn't that it blows up in a terrible disaster. It isn't that there's a huge fight. It's just a sort of slow energy fade. And that energy fade is partly because governments are absolutely amazing at, to use the American jargon, slow walking issues, at taking things that they don't particularly like but don't want to kill, and slowly moving them forward in ways that just grind people's energy away. Now, to prevent that, we need government cultures that are open to this experimentation and are open to turning themselves towards people. And that's one of the things I'd like you to think about as well. We're going to hear a couple of examples about how people are building structures into government that can make citizen participation and governance an everyday reality. But it's not going to be an everyday reality unless civil servants see it as an everyday part of their job. See it as exactly as much part of their job as thinking about finances, or thinking about staffing, or thinking about delivery. If they think about participation and citizenship in the same way, that's great. How do we help them do that? And the final thing I want to say is that we are working in a world which is, we're in a conversation that is exciting, and we are in a world where this feels like the thing that people are talking about right now. You know, I've been working on this, on democracy and participation for 10 years. I mean, before that, I was a civil servant, so you know, I was sort of working on democracy then, but now I'm really working on it. And in that 10 years, we've gone from a situation where I used to have to go knock on people's doors and say, guys, you don't know that this is really important, but this is really important. Trust me, it's going to be really big. It's amazing. And now I'm in a world where people are ringing me up all the time and saying, look, we know this is a problem. We know we're not doing this right. Can you come and help us? So you know, I saw this kind of democracy, participative democracy, internet democracy thing from the really early days when it was like a little cute kitten. And now it's turned into a tiger, which is great and beautiful, but also maybe a bit dangerous, and we have to work out how we handle it. And also we have to understand how the actors who are out there who are not so much on our wavelength, the actors who are out there who are trying to use the tools and techniques that we are using for network power and use their network power in different ways. How we combat that, how we defend against that. Now, I would always argue that the innovation is the defense. That by doing new things, you are building the ways of combating, you know, old structures of power, illiberalism, and authoritarianism. But I'm not naive. I know that we have to build in a context where lots of small organizations with good ideas and lots of agencies like UNDP and others who are doing their best in difficult circumstances are facing organizations with much more cohesive capacity, with much more financial resource, and which are, you know, even if not directly opposed to what we're trying to do, at least not that keen to see it succeed. So we have to remember when we're thinking about the innovations that we're coming up with today, that it's not only the white pieces on the chessboard that move, it's also the black pieces. And so what are the ways in which we can create those environments that are stronger against threats while at the same time being innovative? So I'm not asking you to do much. I'm just asking you to solve the problems of democracy, power, governance, and the entire social system, while making sure that we're defending against the actions of people who are far more powerful and cunning than ourselves. But it's okay, because we've got till about 1 o'clock, so it should be plenty of time. Anyway, this practical demonstration of the problems of lack of voice in our society, I think couldn't come at a better time. I'm about to introduce the panelists, and at some point I'm going to have a new mic to do it with. I think people at the back of the room can hear me if I shout, so it may be that we need to be a little bit, you know, operatic in our approach to the next 10 minutes. But let me get started with our panelists. Just to remind you of the shape of the session, we're going to have 3 presentations from panelists who are bringing really practical examples of how they try to do this in lots of different environments, in widely different circumstances with different ideas, and they're meant not to say what you should do, because actually your circumstances are different, your challenges are different. They're meant to give you ideas and inspirations that you can take onto your table and take into discussion later. So we'll hear from 3 panelists. There'll then be time to ask questions, for elucidation, for ideas, to try and bring out some of the conversations. And then we'll be doing about an hour and 15 minutes work on tables, collectively coming up with ideas. And then right at the end, we'll feed those back, we'll hear from the rest of the room, and we'll try and produce a bit of a synthesis, try and bring some of the ideas together, and work out where we can go next. So I hope that's clear. I hope we're set up for a really interesting and energizing, obviously empowering discussion, because what else would we do? But I'm going to hand over first to Jane from the Irish Citizens Assembly, and not to introduce her, she can introduce herself. I have to say that, you know, having had some experience of watching the Irish Citizens Assembly take place, it is one of the key examples of how you can build structural participation into what seem to be very closed government systems on really difficult questions. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Jane has to say.